She made it to the gate and stopped. Not because she was told to stop, because her legs stopped. 3 weeks of walking on roads that had no end had done something to her knees that she had been ignoring for days, telling herself 1 more kilometer, 1 more hour, 1 more step. Now there were no more steps. She stood at the gate with the other women moving past her, her hands on the fence post, her legs simply refusing. She had not told anyone about the knee. There was no point in telling anyone. The column moved or it didn't, and if you couldn't move with it, you were a problem, and she had spent 3 years learning not to be a problem. So she had walked on it, through the mud, through the cold, through 3 days of transfer between facilities that had asked nothing about her and expected nothing back. She had walked on it and said nothing, and now it was done. The other women moved past without stopping. They had learned not to stop. Stopping drew attention, and attention was never good. The American guard at the gate was counting them through. 14, 15, 16. He stopped. He looked back. 1 woman still at the post, not moving, not looking at anyone. He walked toward her. She did not look up. She was looking at the ground and waiting for whatever happened next to happen. He said something to the translator. The translator said, "He asks what is wrong." She said, "I can't walk." She said it the way you state a fact you have already accepted. Not as a complaint, not as a request, just information. The kind of information that had never changed anything before, and she did not expect it to change anything now. The translator repeated it. The guard looked at her for a moment. Then he did something none of the women had seen before. He called to 2 other soldiers near the entrance. He said something short. They came over without question. Then, carefully and without ceremony, they helped her through the gate, 1 on each side, taking her weight between them, walking her slowly toward the main building while the guard radioed ahead for the medic. The women who had already passed through watched this happen. None of them said anything. And her name was not important to the camp records. She was a number on a transfer document, a former auxiliary from a signals unit that had dissolved 3 weeks earlier when the front collapsed. She was 31 years old and had been walking since before the collapse, first with the retreating column, then with the prisoner group, then through 2 facilities that had processed her paperwork and moved her along without asking whether she was capable of being moved. Nobody had asked about the knee. She had not offered the information. The knee had been bad since the 2nd week of the retreat. A road, a rut, a moment of inattention, and something had shifted that had not shifted back. She had wrapped it herself with a strip of cloth, torn from her coat lining, and walked on it, because walking was what was required, and she was someone who did what was required. The medic's name was Cooper. He was young, 25, from Ohio, with the methodical patience of someone who has learned that rushing a medical assessment produces worse results than taking the time. He examined the knee without expression, pressing along the joint, asking questions through the translator about when and how much. She answered in short sentences, the way she had learned to answer questions from people in authority, enough to be cooperative, not enough to be a problem. He said, "This has been injured for at least 2 weeks. She said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you report it?" She looked at him. The question seemed to her to have an obvious answer, but the way he asked it suggested he genuinely didn't understand, which confused her. She said it wouldn't have changed anything. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "It would have changed this." He meant the examination, the treatment, the 2 soldiers who had walked her through the gate instead of leaving her at the post. She didn't know what to say to that. In the system she had been operating in for 3 years, injury was your own problem. You managed it or you didn't. Reporting it drew attention to a weakness, and weakness had costs. The calculation had always been clear. He was telling her the calculation was different here. He wrapped the knee carefully, applied cold, gave instructions through the translator about what to do and what to avoid. Then he said she would need to stay off it for at least 3 days. She said, "I have work assignments." He said, "Not for 3 days, you don't." She said, "Who decides that?" He said, "I do." She looked at him. He was writing something on his clipboard with the focused efficiency of someone who has made a decision and is now implementing it. He did not look uncertain. He did not look like someone who expected to be argued with. She said, "The other women have assignments." He said, "The other women's knees work." He finished writing. He tore off a sheet and gave it to the translator to deliver to the camp administrator. Then he looked at her. He said, 3 days rest. Then I'll check it again. If it's improving, light duty. If not, more rest. She said, "And if I don't follow this?" He looked at her steadily. He said, "Then it won't heal, and you'll be dealing with this for years." He said it not as a threat, but as a fact, the same tone in which he had said everything else, the flat, practical tone of someone who had no interest in anything except the accurate description of how things were. She was taken to a smaller room in the medical building and given a cot and told to stay off the knee. A meal was brought to her. The other women came to see her in the evening. The oldest among them, the one who had been doing the speaking since the first day of their capture, came last. She sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the wrapped knee. She said, "The guard who stopped, he didn't have to." She said, "No." The oldest woman said, "The count was done. 14 were through. You were the 15th. He could have marked you through and kept moving." She said, "Yes." The oldest woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why do you think he stopped?" She thought about it. She said, "I don't know." The oldest woman said, "I keep trying to understand why." She said, "So do I." The oldest woman stood up. She said, "Rest. 3 days isn't long." She left. She lay on the cot and looked at the ceiling and thought about what Cooper had said. It would have changed this. He had meant it simply. Report the injury and receive treatment. The logic was obvious to him. It had not been obvious to her because the logic she had been living inside for 3 years did not work that way. In the system she had been living inside, the equation was weakness reported equals weakness exploited. You kept injuries private. You kept pain private. You kept anything that could be used against you private. And you managed it yourself, and you kept moving. Here the equation was different. Here weakness reported equals treatment provided. 3 days passed. She stayed off the knee. The meals came to her room. Cooper checked it on the 3rd morning, pressed along the joint, asked her to bend it, watched her face when she did. He said, "Better." She said, "Yes." He said, "Light duty tomorrow. Come back in 3 days." He made a note on his clipboard. Then he said, without looking up, "You should have reported it earlier." She said, "I know." He said, "Next time you will." It was not a question. She looked at him. He was still writing. She said, "Yes, next time I will." He nodded once. Then he moved on to his next patient. She walked back to the barracks slowly, favoring the knee. The oldest woman was waiting near the door. She said, "Better?" She said, "Better." They went inside. The morning count was starting. She stood in line with the others, knee wrapped under her boot, and waited to be counted. The guard moved down the line. He counted her the same as everyone else. A number, present. She thought, 3 days ago, I was one woman who couldn't walk. Now I am a number that is present. Both of those things were true. Neither of them canceled the other. She stood in the line and was counted. Next time she would report it. She would.